I call Lewis Wall.
Kia ora, Mr Chair. Thank you very much for the opportunity to contribute in this title and commencement debate about the New Zealand Flag's Referendums Bill. And I've been thinking quite seriously about what the title of this bill could be, should be, based on how this bill has appeared before us here in the Parliament today. Actually, I'd like to quote from one of the designers, a guy called Pax Wanaken. He is a Kiwi who lives in Sydney, and he contributed 25 designs, and 2 of his designs actually got through. So he's been shortlisted in terms of the 40 flags that have been shortlisted. And what he said, which I find really interesting, is that he doesn't hold much hope for the flag being supported. Doesn't matter what kind of flag, because from his perspective, Mr Chair, this didn't come out of a groundswell of public desire for a new flag. So the title of the bill from his perspective is the No Public Desire for a New Flag Bill. And the reason I want to highlight that point is actually, if you go back and look across time about the call for change and whether or not the New Zealand public have wanted change, we can go back to 1973. When there was a poll, and New Zealanders in 1973, 75% of them said no, we don't want to change the flag. So I acknowledge that this conversation has been around for a long time. Then again in 1984, Mr Chair, in fact 86% of New Zealanders said no when they were asked do they want to change the flag. In 1999, 64% said no. 2008, 62% said no. 2011, 72% no. And actually the latest poll, 70% of New Zealanders said no, they do not want to change the flag. And so that particular quote from Pax actually is incredibly relevant. I think the other title that this bill could have was actually published on the 30th of January 2014, and it was a heading by Isaac Davidson actually, and it could be the Keep It or Flag It Bill, because that was his report after John Key actually announced this idea about changing New Zealand's flag. He had this brainstorm, let's change New Zealand's flag. So actually the title of this bill could be the Keep It or Flag It Bill because of what the Prime Minister thought on the 29th of January 2014, let's change the flag. We could actually look at the National Party website, and we could call this bill the PM John Key believes it's the right time to change the flag bill, which is what the National Party promoted and have been promoting. Because, you know, this bill, and let's get real, has come because the Prime Minister had this brainstorm. But actually the title that I think is really interesting, and this was actually part of the open letter that the Flag Review panel put out themselves, and it is the Open Call No Criteria New Zealand Flag Bill. Because what I find really interesting is that we got 10,292 submissions, these new designs where people decided that they would participate in this process, some of them from overseas. But what we didn't do actually was have a set of criteria about what the flag should represent. So we talk a lot, and this bill has talked a lot about New Zealand's identity. But the reality, Mr Chair, is that it hasn't been part of the conversation at all, because it wasn't a criteria to make sure that our Indigenous people were represented. There wasn't a call to make, or criteria to make sure that the Southern Cross was going to stay, because for us it's part of our national anthem. There wasn't a call to make sure that the koru was in the flag, and in fact there wasn't even a call to make sure that the silver fern was. Even though the Prime Minister, when he announced it on the 29th of January 2014, said that we must ensure that the silver fern is in there, because now apparently this is all part of some tourism boost and some economic boost, because we're going to be recognised globally as a country, because we're going to have this amazing new flag that represents identity. So I find it really interesting that actually we didn't do that. The call went far and wide, and we didn't care what people submitted. We didn't care who they were. We didn't care about the context of their design. We just put out this open call. So that's why I think a title could be the Open Call No Criteria New Zealand Flag Bill. because it seems now that that criteria actually is really important, because we have picked flags that have got a koru, we have picked flags that have got the Southern Cross, we have picked flags that actually represent New Zealand. So when you think about it, I mean, there's so many things that have gone wrong.
Ian Lees Galloway.